Hello everyone, I'm going to kick off today with the first of the instructionals that I mentioned in a video just recently. And I want to talk today about propagators. Now, propagation is the means of making more plants from our parents or mother plants, and this is what all these things were originally used for, was for keeping a plant cosseted when you're taking cuttings and put them into trays and you were trying to grow them on. But they're now used for seed germination as well. They used to be quite complicated devices, generally a big bench like this with misting devices and all that kind of thing. You don't quite need all that these days. But I want to run through a couple of these propagators that I've gathered and collected over the years, and more importantly tell you what I use mostly now. And I also want to discuss a little bit about why I don't use grow lights. I don't like to use grow lights simply because it gives a false impression. Yes, I could add lights to any of my setups that I have for getting plants going early in the year and have wonderful cracking little plants that would really get away and they would look fantastic and be fantastic. But a high amount of people don't actually have access to grow lights, and given that we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis where fuel prices are incredibly high, they're very expensive, or they can be very expensive to run. You can get away with cheaper versions, don't cost so much to run, but out of preference I want my plants to look the same as you're producing at home. There's no point me showing you what fantastic plants I've got because I've grown them well under lights, and then you're looking at your own efforts which by comparison could look almost miserable, and you're thinking, what am I doing wrong? So I want to keep things on this channel as real as possible, and that's one of the reasons why I don't use lights. I say the second one is the cost. I've got a light, I've got in that shed back there, there's a light now, a perfectly good light which would bring plants on fantastically well. I'm just choosing not to use it because I want to keep things a bit real. There are plenty of other channels where people use lights if you want to see the results of those, and I would recommend you go and have a look at some of those. But for me, I will use propagators because it allows me to extend the season, it allows me to get plants going early, and it allows to spread that sowing out for me, which makes life more controllable and easier, and I get into a rhythm of it as I go through the season. So my first propagator that, and I think it's probably one of my best, is this one. This is a Super7 from Garland, and it's basically a windowsill propagator. Just pop it on your windowsill at home. Has got a plug attached, you can heat it, and what this does is it just heats it about 7, 8, 9 degrees above ambient temperature. So if you've got a temperature in your kitchen, let's say if I put this on the kitchen windowsill, which is where this one lives, the kitchen's roughly sort of 16, 17 degrees most of the time, so it'll raise the temperature when I switch this on up to about 23, 24 degrees, which is ample for most things. And the great thing about this is that it uses these trays. They've got their own little trays that fit on there, and these are a standard quarter size seed tray, so you can buy them anywhere. But if you buy this, you'll get the kits and you'll get the lids that go with it, and the lids have a vent on the top that you can turn around, so if there's too much condensation you can open it to vent it, and it also stops from vent diseases such as damping off disease. So it will store 7 of them on there, and I say this lives on my kitchen windowsill year round. And at the minute I've got, as in this one, I've got my onions on it, but it's not switched on yet because onions don't need that temperature. It's a waste really to heat onions at this time of the year. They don't need it, they only need a temperature of about 13 degrees. So I would recommend that, and for most gardeners this will suffice, this will be enough and all you will need, because you can grow in there quite happily sort of 20 or 30 tomatoes, get them potted on, and then you can replace it with something like cucumbers or melons or something else, germinate them, pot them on, move them on, and get the next tray ready. Always handy to have a few of these spare base trays so you've got ones ready to go on when one comes off. but I love this thing, and I say this lives on my kitchen windowsill year round. And I'll provide links underneath these for versions of all of these propagators that I'm going to show you today. Now the next one works on the same basis. It just heats it up to 6, 7, 8, 9 degrees warmer than ambient temperature. So this can sit on a table or a bench next to a window, and it's literally the same thing. It's a heated sealed base with a plug-in cord. All the heating, it's all sealed in so that water can't get in. This is just a bit of capillary matting to help hold some moisture in, and I stopped using this about 4 or 5 years ago, but I've kept it just in case. And then the next one, loads. Next one I bought about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's a step up from the last one, therefore a little bit more pricey. It's the same sort of a base. It's a heated base and it's sealed so that you can't get water into it, but what this has got is a built-in thermostat, so you can set the temperature. And with that you've got a probe end which you can actually put into your pot of compost that's within that with the lid on, and set the temperature so you're getting accurate temperature control for those specialist plants that you might or might not want to grow. So that's a boon. I don't use this very often, and I think last year I didn't use it at all. So whether you need it or not, I don't know. It depends if you're growing specialist plants. And the last option here is this thing. This is a heat mat. This is 1 meter long and about getting on for 40 centimeters wide, and this whole thing heats up. You can put it down on your bench, you can plug it in. It's got a plug so you can plug it in and start to heat your plants. This is great for keeping the root zone of your plants nice and warm. Maybe you've taken them off a propagator, but you can pop them on there and still give them a little bit of warmth at that dodgy time of year between March and April, when the weather's still too cold outside. And it's what I do is, if my tomatoes get too tall in this other propagator here, which we'll talk about in a minute, I'll pop them onto this heat mat and plug it in. And the great thing about this is you can buy a thermostat, you can plug that in, this will be plugged in as well, and you've got that temperature probe there to plunge into your compost or into your potted plants, and you can control the temperature that this heat mat gets to. So that's another option. What I wanted to do, and I've never got round to it, was to build a proper base for this out of polystyrene and timber, to set this in properly, and then a cover over the top, make it into a better thing. And that could be done relatively easily and definitely very cheaply. So that's that. We'll move on to this thing next to me, the Beast. Now this is my Beast propagator. The whole structure of it, I made a basic table or bench and then put an old piece of worktop on top, because all of this is recycled timber. All the timber that I used in it is recycled. Even these are old tiling beams. It's just a simple frame for this cover to go over the top to keep the heat in. And in here, it's just got a loose fitting piece of plastic, and underneath is sand. And if I just part this sand away, you'll be able to see the heating cable that is within this. Again, it's not switched on yet at this time of the year. Not ready to use it. And I built up the sides, I lined it with plastic and then lined it with polystyrene, and then put a layer of sand on the base. Then I lined up this cable that's within here. I lined that out up and down the width, putting a handful of sand on top of each cable to keep it in place. Then I topped up the sand, and it's just ordinary builder sand. Topped up the sand just to cover it. And as long as you keep this sand moist, it will transmit and hold the heat in there, and then gradually rise up and heat and become a propagator. This is it's absolutely brilliant. And then when you pull these covers down and over, it keeps all that heat within there. So I just paid attention at the start, made sure everything was all clipped up properly and nicely done, and it's paid me back. I've had this for many years now. And the heating cable comes out at this end and is plugged into another thermostat, which you can set the temperature there, and then the thermostat is plugged into the electric supply. I'm not entirely sure what it costs to run, but as I see it, I don't go out drinking, I don't go to the football, I don't have expensive hobbies, I just do my gardening. So that's my indulgence, and I'm happy with that. Now the stuff I use there, that soil warming cable and my thermostat, when I bought it, came to around 150 quid, but there are cheaper options. With this thermostat that I use with the heat mat, with that and a 24-meter soil warming cable, will come to about 50 quid. And again, I'll put a link underneath so you can see it. And that will make a bed this size, which is 8 foot long and 2 foot wide. Most people won't need or want one that big. If you wanted one half that size, it's going to be a few quid less. I think it's about 10 or 15 pound less. So you can tailor the size, but that was 24 meters of cable, soil warming cable in there to make 8 foot by 2 foot. And out of all of them, which do I use the most? The Super7 is definitely the early start of the season to get me seeds going, and then this beast then takes over, and then from there they might go onto the heat mat for a little while. These two other propagators are kind of redundant now, but if I need to, I will use them. And as I say, each one of these will take a proper full-size seed tray, and if you furrow sow like you've seen me sow before, like I will show you again this year, you'll easily get 20 or 30 different varieties of, let's say, flowers going in one of them quite easily, all at one time. So it's well worth it. But this, if you're serious about growing, if you've got an allotment plot and you've got one of a substantial size, you might want to consider one of these, or at least a half length one, 4 foot by 2 foot. If you don't need anything this involved, then the Super7 will probably be enough for, I would say, 90% of people, and I can heartily recommend it. Just be careful when you buy them that it's got these lids. And the reason I'm showing you this is because there are some that are more angular, the more straighter, the less profiled, and they're very brittle. They'll break within a year of use, so be very careful about that. Make sure it's quite angular and rounded like this one. Say the old type is still for sale in some places, but I'll put the link in for this one with the rounded tops. There we go, Propagators 101. Next video I shall be back down the plot. I've got a compost heap to empty, the DIY one that's in the big polytunnel. I'm going to be spreading that and emptying that, and I must address and start the groundworks for the new polytunnel going up. So that's all coming up in this next week, I should think, hopefully, if the weather holds. But I hope you got something from that, the information about the propagators. If you're not sure about anything, just pop a comment down below and we'll get it all sorted out for you. We're getting the right propagator and getting started, and getting an early start in the year couldn't be more important. So that's the first of these instructionals, but that's it for today. Please look after yourselves, everyone, stay safe, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Ta-ra now.